Welcome to Self, the podcast that serves as sex education, self education through self expression, self discovery, and self exploration. I'm your host, Courtney Brame, and I am moving to Portland in 3 weeks. The next, from today, what's today? October 11th. So we got the 11th is tomorrow, or the 12th is tomorrow, the 19th, and then the 26th. I think I'm messing up my dates, but in 3 weeks I'll be living in Portland, Oregon, that is. So still going through the process of selling all my things. I sold my couch, which was the biggest thing I was concerned about. Hopefully I can get my coffee table, kitchen table, and bed sold. If not, no worries. I'll figure out something to do with them. I might even just put online I'm giving them away and just see what happens. On the last self episode, what came up was this concept of normalcy. So, normal kind of being what the baseline is, and then looking at the word crazy, which is just not normal and inconsistent, and perhaps an unconscious behavior pattern that isn't consistent with beliefs, and then queer, which is consciously different or not normal, and like a celebrated intentional way of being that is consistent with behaviors and beliefs. Uh, for me, I went through this period where I think it was 2019. Uh, I thought to myself, okay, I'm attracted to non binary, feminine presenting people. So, what does that mean about my sexuality? If I were to date or have romantic interest or have sex with anyone that doesn't identify as a woman, then what does that mean for my sexuality? What does that make me? Does that still make me heterosexual? Does that make me heteroflexible? Does that make me queer? Does that make me something else that I may not be hip to the language of? And through talking to a bunch of different people, they said, "Oh, that makes you straight." Part of me was a little bit disappointed because I already feel a little bit out of touch with what it means to be a straight black man. And I also don't feel like being an LGBT community member, black man, fits me either. So there's this null or void zone here that I reside in where I'm like on the outskirts of it all because of allyship, right? And I don't know. I don't know. I really don't know how to answer this. This has just been something that I've pondered in my personal experience of wondering what that is. Now, I know I can't do anything with a dick because I gag on my toothbrush. It's just not there for me. I have no interest in men or penises for that matter. Like, penises don't excite me or turn me on in any way, shape, or form. As a matter of fact, like, I tried to have a threesome, a male-female male threesome, and just flat out didn't get hard. I'm still trying to process what that was about, whether it was a situation that was set up, if there was because I was the one that coordinated it all. I was excited about it and everything. It was like, yeah, it's gonna be great. It's gonna be just like the pornos. It was nothing like the pornos, and boy, did I not accept that situation when it happened. But that's even in that matter, you know. So you got two straight guys and a woman, right? And clearly we're going to see each other naked. We're going to touch each other in some points, right? So what does that mean for my sexuality or the other person's sexuality or everyone's sexuality? But I'm getting into the sex portion of it way too early. But the concept of just what it means to be not normal. We all have this baseline that's been handed down to us from our communities, our environments, our school systems, our families, our friends, our relationships, the media. But what does it mean when they don't really mesh with our experiences? When what's being told to us that normal is conflicts with what we believe, or it conflicts with our behaviors, then what? What happens? in the sense of looking at it from a mental health perspective, people throw this word crazy around so freely. And there's a definition for crazy. I forget exactly what it is. But when I hear crazy or see crazy, it simply means inconsistent. My grandmother, who passed away when I was 13, she was diagnosed either schizophrenic or bipolar, had the diagnosis, took the medication, and when she wasn't on her medication or wasn't, quote, normal, she was called crazy for her outbursts, for how she would just show up, how she would behave. Her beliefs would conflict with what our beliefs were about things, and it would be reflective of her behavior. I remember she'd say things, she'd make up words, she'd talk about always seeing demons everywhere. She gave me and my brothers like names, and I love my grandma to death. I didn't know anything was wrong with her. I just thought that was who she was. So it took for society and my family to tell me, oh, she crazy. And crazy doesn't fit. Crazy to me, at that point in time, I think would have meant, harming people. My grandma didn't harm anyone. My grandma loved us. Yeah, she bought me Pokemon cards. We'd watch movies. She'd make snacks. No one was harmed. It's just that sometimes her behaviors were very inconsistent with what the rules of normalcy are, that I guess would mean what it meant to be a grandma. But all my grandparents did things different. None of my grandparents were the same. We'd go over their houses sometimes, and it was just like chill time. That's what a grandparent's house was. That was always consistent. But looking at crazy as not normal in one sense, I can see how it's just completely unintentional confliction and inconsistency between what one's normal behavior patterns are when they go along with your beliefs and what they are when they're against your beliefs, when your actions and behaviors are different than what's expected by the people around you. Bingo, that's what it is. Defying the expectations of others is sometimes viewed as crazy. And whenever it conflicts or whenever there's an inconsistency in that, even within yourself and your behaviors, and it's unconscious. I wish I could draw a good diagram for this, because I think there's something here to be said for normalcy, and then on an unconscious inconsistency pattern, it's crazy. But then on the other end of it, it's empowering. It's what it means to be queer. No, I'm not normal. And I intentionally am not normal because what I believe or what I've been taught is different than what I've experienced. And therefore, I've shaped my beliefs around this being what my intentionality is. This is what it means for me to be. This is what it means for me to exist. It means to intentionally show up in a way that essentially defies normalcy, that makes other people uncomfortable. I defy your expectations. I make my own. Like, that's what I get when I hear queer, and that's a very empowering mindset. Not to say that you can go from crazy to queer or queer to crazy, but it seems to make sense to me in that way when you say not normal. And there's no bad wording for it. It's not it's not that queer can be crazy, crazy can be queer. It's just that both of these things are not normal. And when someone's called crazy, it's one thing. And when someone's called queer, it's another thing. And it's just not normal. That's it. So leaving it here in context, if we look at politics, right? A crazy person would be, I don't want to talk about anybody's politics because I think a lot of people's beliefs genuinely are what they believe to be right. And it's just like with anyone who reads the Bible, same thing with religion, same thing they believe in relationships. Wherever your value system comes from, that's where your value system comes from. We're all products of our environment, right? So one way that we can look at it is in a sexual sense, right? I think that when we have sex with a person, I forget where I read this, and I wish that I could. I believe it was on the They Talk Sex podcast. I do not remember who the guest was. It was a guy, and it was in one of the first 11 episodes for sure. And one of the things he said that I felt in my nervous system when he said it was have sex with someone as soon as possible, and you get to know who that person really is based on how they communicate in sex, how they communicate before sex, during sex, post sex. And I look at all my past relationships, and that is so spot on. That is so spot on. So when I say this, I believe that you can identify where a person's baseline for normalcy is. Not to say that there's anything wrong with someone being vanilla. There's nothing wrong with someone being kinky. And there's also nothing wrong with someone being insecure. It's really reflective of the communication that takes place before, during, after sex. So in terms of how a person goes about asking for what they need, do they know how to say no? Do they know how to receive a no? What about consent? Do they honor your boundaries? Is this someone who is abusive potentially? How are they with power? Because our naked bodies are the most physically vulnerable that we can be. The communication that occurs where a person is asking for something or establishing a boundary or receiving and respecting and honoring a boundary, these are also moments of vulnerability. So in this sense, what is being communicated, how communication is occurring in that sense lets you know a lot of what you need to know about a person's communication style and how they're going to be moving forward as a partner. How they communicate about sex is how they communicate about finances, is how they communicate about the future, is how they communicate about their relationship with you and their relationships with others, right? So not to say that you can identify if somebody's crazy or queer in sex, because that's the topic of the podcast, that's the episode title, it's got both those two words in it, but you get a really good baseline on someone's sense of normalcy. And you can identify, okay, is this pattern unconscious or is this intended alignment with beliefs and behavior? And let me tell you, like, I mentioned that I've wondered if I was queer for so long. And I've had like queer identifying people even tell me, you seem pretty straight. And I mean, part of me is like, oh man, that's boring, man. So like I've settled into this identity as being queer friendly. I heard someone that I look up to, this black kinky queer or kinky polyamorous man, he calls himself hetero queer. And I thought that was really cool, but it still doesn't fit. Like I'm a cisgendered, former athlete. Like I fit so many aspects of masculinity on the surface. And when you talk to me, I think that I'm very emotionally aware and intelligent. And for someone who presents as masculine as I am, there's a direct conflict of what you see and then what you experience with me. So that inconsistency there, for some people, they may receive that as, a good thing. They could receive it as a bad thing. But when what you see doesn't match what you expect, I think that that's when we put people into the bubble of something that's just not normal, right? For me, it's been not normal in the sense of not being crazy, but also not being queer. So here's an outlier. just different. So you got crazy on one end, queer on another end, and then just different. I guess that's like an elevated level of normalcy. Different. Because I feel like we should all have this healthy balance of masculinity, femininity, but it shouldn't even be separated. You just be a whole ass human, right? I should be able to step into whatever aspect of myself is necessary to get the job done. In my yoga teacher training, we talked a lot about how the gods present one way or another, and then when it comes to human interactions, they show up in whatever form is necessary to get the job done. So one of the gods who is manly or a man can come down and be a woman in order to get the job done. So it's really about stepping into whatever aspect of yourself you need to that's necessary in order to get the job done. So back to this whole normalcy thing. In the sexual context, I'm not crazy in bed. I'm not inconsistent. I am very intentional when I'm having sex, and the queer aspect of how I have sex. Like I hear people say queer up sex. That was the episode. I think it was queering up sex. Yes. I like using sex toys with partners. I enjoy doing things a little bit different with partners than what they would expect. I would like the entirety of the spectrum demonstrating versatility from being able to have like a ton of foreplay, making out, touching, body exploration, and then like slow love making type sex, sensual, and just taking our time with one another. And then sometimes I want a quickie. Sometimes I want to throw you around and get into that kinky stuff, slap ass, pull hair, and go wild and get sweaty and like just manhandle. Like those things come out. And it's not the traditional sense of how I was taught to have sex. It directly goes against that. All rap music that I've listened to about sex has said one thing. When I listen to R&B and they talk about lovemaking, it's been another thing. And these are two different displays of masculinity because they go against one another. So in that sense, like juggling the back and forth between what I believe in and what I do, I could think that I'm crazy because there's inconsistency there. And then on the other hand, I can just accept the fact that maybe I'm versatile and I want to do all these things. Like even with having a threesome or threesomes, and it's not going to look like a completely heterosexual way of, oh, no, dog, if you touch me, that's it, I'm going to knock you out. It's like, oh, our legs brush up against each other. Or somebody's like doing a DP and balls touch, right? Then that's not challenging anyone's sexuality, right? Same thing with the same thing within like a relationship with someone who's non-binary. I recognize now that in those interactions, I have to have a little bit of a more in-depth discussion because while I'm used to having sex one way, that person may be used to having sex a different way because they may not associate with certain body parts. They may not do the things that I would expect them to do based on how they present themselves. So again, I think that the aspect of queerness is an intentional, an intentional, not normal. Whereas crazy is an unintentional inconsistency of what behaviors and beliefs conflicting with one another. I just butchered that statement, but I said it a few times, so you know what I mean. There isn't really much to sit with here other than, it's okay to be different, I don't think you go from being crazy to queer to crazy. I think that we go from normal to being something else. And we've got one end of the spectrum where other people perceive someone as crazy, and then this other end of the spectrum where when you're intentionally just not, you're challenging those belief structures instilled in you that don't serve you, and you're challenging them with your behaviors, with your expression. So maybe that's what queer is. And in that sense of like my actions, then perhaps, yeah, I take queer action. I might be a straight dude when it comes to my sexuality and my gender presentation, but my actions are not traditionally dude things, right? So, in that sense, I recognize that being queer doesn't fit for me. The actions of queer or taking queer action or aligning as an ally with the behavior. I don't know how to say what I'm trying to say, but queerness as an action word, as a verb, that more so fits. Because I also went through a time where I thought I was crazy, or thought I was gonna be crazy, because the way that I was raised is not how I'm behaving in any way, shape, or form. Like, I'm not married, I don't have a career, like, I'm doing a lot of things intentionally in a non-traditional way. People will call you crazy for not having kids by 30 years old, but for not having a 401k and a full-time job. Like, I'm an entrepreneur now. I'm in the nonprofit space. I'm moving across the country. I don't have any children. I don't even have a prospective wife or life partner right now. This is crazy compared to the people around me who know me, who I've grown up with. And for me, it's just a not normal action. So, in the sense of action taking, perhaps my behaviors are more in line with what it means to be queer, intentionally not normal. And this aligns my behaviors and my beliefs. So, I gotta open up the gym. I got a client that's probably standing outside waiting on me. So yeah, I'm gonna leave this here because I think this was good. On the next episode or the next time that I talk, I want to talk about how we demonstrate insecurities. Where this is coming from is when I talk to women who get ghosted. I think that perhaps it's a withholding of insecurities, perhaps about physical traits, whereas some things that men would find themselves insecure about, like saying that they're married or have kids. There's different levels of sharing and vulnerability when it comes to insecurity. So when we talk about this, I wanna focus on that, and I'm gonna spend this next week reflecting on this in my own experiences, and perhaps get some feedback from other men and women as well. So join me next week on Self. I hope to have you here. Thank you for being here today. Have yourself an intentionally not normal rest of the week. That was terrible.